Having the conversations that matter. The New View podcast.
Hello and welcome to the New View. We are back for our third season of the show on YouTube and our fourth season overall. It has been a little while since we've been with you, and I'm very excited to start this new season today with a very special guest, Carla Warren, who is a journalist and graduate from the University of Houston, who studied broadcast journalism, law, values, and policy. Carla, it's so good to see you, and thank you for coming on my show.
It's good to see you, and thank you for having me.
So the slogan of our show in our rebrand is having the conversations that matter. And today's conversation is a very important one. We're going to be addressing things like what it's like to live in America today in the midst of a pandemic and a new president. We're going to be addressing contemporary matters got to do with race, got to do with inequality, and got to do with all of the key issues that are starting to categorize American life for those of us who live outside of America. I want to get that insider perspective. And I want to start by actually first addressing what happened in Boulder yesterday, where there was a shooting in a supermarket. This seems to be too regular a phenomenon in the United States of having a form of an active shooting occurring in a public space or occurring in a school, and this time a supermarket. I just want to start by getting your initial reaction or your gut thought.
Oh, wow. My initial reaction was, again, simply because, like you said, this occurs far too often. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the American people are a little bit desensitized to these things because they happen so often. I think it's past the point of asking for change. It's at a point where we have to demand it. We're not safe. You're not safe at work. You're not safe at the grocery store. You're not safe at a concert. You're not safe in a school building. It can happen anywhere at any time. And I think that that's unacceptable.
And let's delve into that a little bit. So one of the key things that we seem to see on television and in documentaries about guns in America is that Americans have a constitutional right to bear arms. And we have this huge lobby in the United States called the National Rifle Association. Now, it seems like a common rhetoric from these kind of groups every time a shooting happens is that, you know, it's not the gun that is to blame, it's the gun owner or the shooter in each case. How do you respond to that type of talk? Do you think it's a lot of nonsense, or are they coming from a good place?
I think it's nonsense. And I think it's nonsense because, okay, so let's break down what you said. Let's start with the constitutional element of it, right? So Americans hold our Constitution in very high regard. We always refer to it as a living, breathing document because it's flexible and it can be changed at any time. And I think a lot of people have this romanticized idea of it, and this romanticized idea of the founding fathers. But you cannot hold a document from the 18th century up to the 21st century and expect it to be absolutely perfect for everything that's going on in this day and age. I believe in the right to bear arms. I'm from Texas. So guns have always been a part of my life from a small child. Yes, I grew up around guns. Yes, I've shot guns. That's not what we're talking about here. I think the issue is the type of weapon. When you have these automatic or semi-automatic weapons with huge magazines that are able to shoot multiple people at one time without being reloaded, I think some things should be restricted only for military use. I don't think there's a reason for a regular citizen to have an AR-15 or anything like that. And so the NRA, in my opinion, is serving against the interests of the American people, and they push a lot of BS rhetoric. It's not about taking guns and disarming the people, right? Because Americans, our biggest fear is, a tyrannical government. And I put air quotes there because a lot of these people that have that as their biggest fear, they sure weren't fearful of Trump. And he was the most tyrannical American president I've seen in my lifetime. But there's this idea that if we are disarmed, then we will be in a position where the government can do whatever they want to do to us and we can't fight back, which I think is, it doesn't make sense to me. If that's what they want to use to get people on their side and to fear monger and do, then that's their choice. But I think it's time that we have a serious conversation about guns, about the Second Amendment, and how do we move forward. Because let's be honest, our Constitution is not perfect. It's been amended 27 times. So I know that in terms of government and policy, 27 times for a Constitution is a small amount, especially when you're talking about from the 1700s until now. Only 27 times, that's great. But my point is, it has happened, and it can happen again. Every other right in the Bill of Rights, our first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they have limitations. You have limitations on freedom of speech. I can't go in a public space and shout fire when there's actually no fire. I'll be arrested. So I don't understand this idea that the Second Amendment is the golden amendment that can't be touched and has no limitations. The time to do something was years ago, right? But it's never too late. It's never too late. And I think we have to take this moment and capitalize off of it and make the most of it, because too many lives have been lost, way too many.
And what do you actually prescribe to be the causes of this type of violence? It's so, yes, other countries actually do allow for the use of guns and the ownership of guns in their society and in their citizenry. But why this level of violence on public spaces, a supermarket, a school? Even I remember the Sandy Hook Elementary School. It's very disturbing. What do you put it down to?
I think that the difference between the United States and these other countries is cultural, of course. And I can't be remiss in mentioning the fact that the majority of these shooters are white and male. That's a very important element in this situation. I think that we've seen such a spike in mass shootings. Don't get me wrong, it's been going on for some time, but in the last few years, it's almost a daily, monthly occurrence. It happens regularly. It doesn't always get the media coverage that the last two have gotten, but people being shooting happening in public spaces is not uncommon here. And the suspect in these situations fit a certain profile. I think that with the changing demographics of the United States and also a shifting power dynamic, a lot of white males in this country don't like that. And when you have media outlets, I won't say any names, but I think we can all figure out of whom I'm speaking of. You have certain media outlets that push dangerous rhetoric that make people believe that all of their problems in life are due to them. You get what I'm saying? It becomes a narrative of it's us versus them. And if they just weren't here, then we would be in a better situation. But not only just that, because there have been other white people that were victims of mass shootings. So I think aside from a racial element, there's just a very unhealthy relationship that American people have with mental health and having conversations about what's really going on internally. A lot of these people, I don't want to excuse their actions and say, oh, they did this because they were mentally ill. But that's definitely a part of it. There's so many different elements to this situation. I think that we have to call a thing and address that the white men in this country, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say the exact root, but there's something going on with white men in America, and it's putting us all in danger. And we need to figure out what it is and address it. My personal opinion is a power shift, but I'm sure there's other things in addition to that.
And you have started to mention this polarization in the media and also in the society, of labeling others as the problem. And I think in particular, those others that you may be referring to are coming from migrant backgrounds, recent arrivals to the United States within recent decades. So as there's this intense polarization in the United States at the moment in politics, I'm wondering, do you think that the level of polarization that we're seeing right now is at its highest level that you have ever lived through? Or do you think this is just a continuation of what we've been experiencing for the last 10 years, really, I guess, or more since Obama came to power?
I think that the level of polarization right now is at a peak point. Is definitely higher than what I've experienced. So to go back quite some years, I'm not that old. I'm only 23, but I remember well enough to know that after 9/11 happened, when George Bush was in office, there was this very there was a spirit of collectivism in the United States, right? People felt that Americans were Americans, right? And that we all needed to stick together, because what happened that morning in New York City affected people of all backgrounds, right? Especially with it. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that it happened in New York, which is, an immigrant hub in the United States. Almost everyone in New York City comes from somewhere else. That was like our biggest entry point at Ellis Island at one point for immigrants. So New York is full of people that, today would be considered others. So to go from an era in time where we were so united, to see how we regressed to a society that is so divided, it's disturbing. And I do think that it's at a peak.
So given that this is the case, that we have this extreme level of polarization, do you think that now that there's a new president in the United States, that he and his vice president will be able to bridge this level of polarization? Or is it just a gap that's too far?
I hate to be a pessimist, but I don't think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris alone have the power to fix this. The reason that I say that is because over the last 4 years, and even a little bit before that, back in the Obama era, we saw the beginnings of what was becoming a very dangerous division in our country. And during Obama's presidency, there were a lot of not so nice things said, racial epithets and things of that nature. But it was kicked into a higher degree by Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump came in and he capitalized off of the emotions that Americans were feeling in the moment. Because to be quite frank, there were people that had a problem with Obama being president, not based off of policy, but based off pigment. They didn't like the fact that he was indeed a Black president. And Donald Trump knew this. And he also, let's not forget, he taunted Obama during his presidency, and he started a whole birther movement saying that, he's not truly fit to be president because he wasn't born here. He was born in Kenya, and all of these wild theories. We've seen Donald Trump. He showed us who he was before he ran for office. He showed us that he was a person that liked to push out things that he knew weren't true in order to play off people's emotions and get a reaction and get his way. And that's exactly what he did when he took office. So he took something that was kind of already there and made it even bigger. And Kamala and Joe, I think, don't get me wrong, they made having them in office as opposed to having him enter a second term has definitely helped aid in dying down some of that, some of that extreme polarization. But I don't think it will completely fix it. I think that's something that's going to take quite some time to undo.
What does it say about a country where over 50%, well, actually, that's not the case, but close to 50% voted for him when he first ran for president? And on the second occasion, even more voters voted for Donald Trump the second time he ran, even though he lost. The second time he ran, he actually garnered more votes than the first time. What does it say about a country where a person like that, with a character like that, can garner over 60 million votes?
I think it says that we've been masquerading. I think it says that the United States has a lot of internal work to do, and that that what we believe about ourselves is not the truth. And I think minorities in this country already knew that. We already knew that there was a lot of nastiness underneath the, pomp and fare that we put on about our country. The first time that people voted Donald Trump into office, a lot of them excused it by saying they wanted someone who was a businessman that was going to run this country like a business. They made it completely economic, right? But after 4 years of him doing just vile things, releasing the military upon the American people, that was one of the biggest OMG moments. I hate to say OMG, but
there were a lot of them.
I couldn't find any other words to describe it. It was like an OMG moment. It's like, no way this is happening. After seeing how he behaved in office for 4 years, he was so unprofessional, not presidential, very disrespectful, created rifts between us and other countries that we should not have had problems with. So not diplomatic. I mean, I could go on and on and on about his professional and personal wrongs, right? But all in all, after seeing that, after bearing witness to that, and still getting up and going to a poll and selecting Donald J. Trump for president, I think at that point, we have to be realistic about why people were voting for Donald Trump. And it wasn't based on policy or anything. Like I said, I think that there's a fear about change.
Do you think that his personality while in office and his redefining of what a statesperson is, do you think that actually reflects a large part of American society today? This kind of brash, pompous, sexist, racist kind of character could actually be an accurate reflection of 40 to 50% of the society today.
I do. I think so. And the proof is in what we've seen people do on behalf of Donald Trump or because of Donald Trump. I mean, look at what happened on January 6th at our Capitol. How many thousands of people showed up to Washington, D.C. to do what they did, or people in small town USA that are getting into fights with business owners about not wearing masks and just horrible things. People being attacked. Most as of late, the most recent victims are Asian Americans. There are people in society that mimic that behavior, and Donald Trump, let's be clear, he didn't create those monsters, he enabled them. Those feelings were always there, right? They just didn't feel comfortable. They didn't have an outlet to express them because they felt like no one in society, especially people of power, would openly accept it and condone it. But once Donald Trump stepped into that position, it was like a green light because he's a leader, and I use that word loosely. He's a leader, and so people follow leaders. So if you've bottled up your true feelings for X amount of years, and then you get a president that's publicly saying everything that you feel deep down inside, but you just never felt comfortable saying, then yeah, you're going to unleash it on society. And that's unfair. That's unfair to the rest of us.
So, given that we have this situation where school shootings are happening, racism and racist attacks against Asian Americans in this case recently, and against other minorities in general in the United States is occurring on a daily, probably hourly, minutely basis in the United States. Do you really see any change between living in Joe Biden's America versus living in Donald Trump's America?
This may sound crazy, but despite all of the bad things that are happening right now, the answer is yes, I do. Because I truly feel that if Donald Trump would have been reelected in November, I believe the hatred right now would be even worse than what we're seeing. Believe it or not, I believe that it would be way more amplified than what we have right now. Because at that point, at the point of reelection, I believe that his supporters would have believed that he was invincible and that they were invincible. And I don't know what type of violence would have been unleashed. You know, we've had so much violence over the past 4 years. We can't forget about Charlottesville and the neo-Nazis and the tiki torches, you know, things like that. With him having another 4 years in office, oh my God, I don't even want to think about what would have occurred. So yes, things are not perfect right now. But if Donald Trump was in office, I think they would be significantly worse. So I feel as though I feel differently. As a Black woman in the United States, yes, I immediately felt safer when the election was called for Joe Biden and not Donald Trump, for sure.
And beyond internal feelings in your day-to-day life when you're outside, I mean, in the midst of a pandemic, maybe we're not outside that much these days, but from what you can see and even from what you feel and maybe even being in touch with people digitally, does the atmosphere feel different in the US now that Biden is president? Does the temperature feel a little bit reduced?
Yeah, it does feel differently. I mean, obviously, like you said, we're not outside 24/7. And, you know, if we are outside, you're likely in your car going somewhere to get something that you need, not just outside for fun. But simple things like seeing yard signs. A lot of Trump yard signs have disappeared. I live in Texas, the land of pickup trucks. So people would drive down, and I live in Houston, which is let's be clear, Houston is not rural. It's a very big city. It's America's 4th largest city. And we still have that pickup truck culture. But being able to drive down the street and not see these huge, and I mean huge, Trump flags flying from the back of people's trucks in the wind, it feels different. It just feels, I can't explain it. But yes, outside, aside from my personal feelings, outside in the real world, when you step outside your door, there is a difference, a huge difference, a huge difference.
And just in relation to having a President Biden running the United States, do you have any fears or concerns that he is going to lead the country in a quite like a George Bush Republican style? And less of an inspirational, like Obama type of figure?
Yes, I don't see Joe. Okay, I don't see Joe Biden as a how do I say this, revolutionary president.
Mm.
I don't think anyone does. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I think we all see Joe Biden as kind of a transitional president.
Mm.
That's how I view him. Um, we're not expecting him to do anything except for salvage what is left of our country, right? And then later we'll worry about how do we rebuild and regroup. But right now we're hanging on by a thread. People are in dire situations. You know, it's bad enough that we have a pandemic that's killed so many Americans. I think our death toll is over 500,000
Mm-hmm.
deaths. Um, it's killed so many people. It's made even more people very sick. People are out of work. Um, children have missed significant time in school, which, I mean, we'll be dealing with the after effects of this for a very long time. What happens in 10 to 15 years when these children that were educationally, you know,
Deprived.
I hate to say it, yeah, but deprived. What happens when they are adults and they're entering the workforce? Like,
Mm.
how are we going to deal with that? We have to worry about that later. Right now, people are just trying to survive. It's that serious. We have people who are hungry. We have people who are being thrown out on the street because they can't pay their bills. And we just need Joe Biden to provide us some type of feelings of security. Well, I'm not just going to say feelings, tangible security, like the COVID relief stimulus and things
Mm-hmm.
of that nature. So no, I don't see him as an Obama type figure at all. Yeah, like you likened him to George Bush, and I agree with that way more than I agree with him being an Obama like figure.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly, Donald Trump, despite not having access to social media, has said that he's
Mhm.
going to create his own social media very shortly. But he's able to get messages out in some ways. And one of the things that he keeps reiterating throughout March is that we should be very thankful to him for the vaccines, and that Biden is basically, uh, he's basically any success he's having on tackling this pandemic is thanks to Donald Trump. What do you make of that kind of an analysis? Is it fair?
Okay, so I like to think I'm a fair person. I'll say this. When it comes to pushing for a vaccine, right? The Trump administration did play a role in trying to secure vaccinations for the American people. However, let's be very clear. This is the same administration that told us that this was like a flu. This was the same administration that when the virus first made its way to the United States, he said, "Oh, it'll just be gone in about a week." It's like, I think he said a week or a month, and he actually used the word magic. He was like, "It's like magic. It'll disappear. It'll be gone." This is the same administration that downplayed the virus, downplayed masks, downplayed the CDC, downplayed guidelines and advice given by Dr. Fauci. Um, that's his administration. And if he wants to take the credit for a vaccine, that's fine with me. But also take the credit for the pandemic getting out of control. That's
Mm.
the way that I feel about it. Because had Donald Trump been a responsible leader and let the American people know the truth and be honest about how serious of a virus this was and how people needed to take the proper precautions, I don't think the pandemic would have ever gotten as out of control as it did or as it is, because it's still very bad.
Mm.
The United States, to be a first world country and have the carnage and death that has happened through this virus, I think it's just unacceptable. I mean, you can't even begin to explain how badly they dropped the ball. But if he wants to take credit for the vaccine, I have no problem in giving him the credit for that because it did roll out under his administration. So yeah, if he wants the credit, he can have it.
And when it comes to the economic fallout from this pandemic, you've mentioned how people are sleeping in cars, people are, food insecure. You've highlighted factors which are common in other countries as well at the moment throughout this pandemic. I'm very curious about these stimulus checks. So the stimulus check program, from my understanding, is a check which is signed by the federal government, which is being paid directly to American citizens to try and deal with the costs and the staying at home factors and being out of work as a result of COVID-19. Have these checks worked? Have they made any difference to people's lives? Because one thing that I've seen about a month ago or a month and a half ago is that these checks were perhaps a source of stocks like GameStop going up 2,000 and 3,000%. So I'm just wondering, like, I mean, do these checks really make a difference in people's lives, and should they really be going to everybody?
Okay, so this is my opinion on stimulus checks.
A lived experience here. I'm curious about it.
Okay, so here's the deal. We got our first stimulus checks around April or May of 2020, and they were for 1,200 USD. Now, just to put that into perspective, most people that I know in various places in the country can't even pay a month's rent with 1,200 USD. And then we got another one for 600 that came in January of 2021. So let's just break that down right there. So from May of 2020 to January of 2021, the American people were only given $1,200 by the American government to last them for like 7
months. Yeah.
Yes, for 7 months. You cannot survive off of $1,200 USD from 1 month. Okay. Now, granted, people who were unemployed, they received, unemployment. So they had other subsidies aside from just a stimulus. And there were also issues with the first one because college age students that may be listed on their parents' taxes as dependents weren't eligible for one. But the thing about that is a lot of college students, although they may be listed as dependents, they actually are not dependent upon their parents. And their parents don't pay their bills, they don't buy them food, they don't provide for them. And so you had a whole segment of the population completely disregarded. There's been issues. There's been issues. The stimulus program has not been perfect. And then the $600 that came in January felt like a little and a little too late. It was such a small amount and it was so late. But it was better than getting nothing, but it definitely didn't solve anyone's problems who was facing like immediate eviction or anything like that. And then as of last week, actually, the first round of the $1,400 stimulus checks went out. And to answer your question, has it changed anybody's life? No, it hasn't. It hasn't changed anyone's life. It's not enough money. The United States government, if you read these bills, these stimulus bills, and where most of the money is going to, a big portion of it is not going to direct payments to the American people. There's a lot of other stuff in these bills, right? And so I think when you talk about money in this country, the thing that pisses me off the most is the fact that the United States is not short on resources. How do I say this? The United States is wealthy. The American people are not. And so when you have a country that has such a huge gap in wealth distribution, I don't think most people, I think if the American people truly knew just how big of a wealth gap we had, there would probably be a Marie Antoinette situation going on in our streets right now, to be honest. Most people really don't know just how bad it is, and that it doesn't have to be this way. But no, back to the checks, they're not changing anyone's lives. Most people are using them on, well, I shouldn't say most, but I've seen a lot of people on social media say that they are using them to buy things that they want, not necessarily need, because to be honest with you, it's not going to change their lives. So if you get $1,400 after being in a pandemic for a year, and you're $10,000 behind in rent, right? Giving your landlord $1,400, that's not going to change your economic situation. Or if your car is getting repossessed, or if you had a loved one die from the virus and you couldn't pay for their funeral services, which averaged to be about $10,000 in the United States. The point that I'm making is these stimulus checks are not saving anybody's lives. If they had been regular monthly payments from the beginning, maybe they would have made a difference. I don't want to sound like I'm ungrateful or that the American people are ungrateful. I just think that more should have been done from the beginning, and that a total of, let's see, it's been $3,200 over the course of almost a year. $3,200 over a year? Come on now. That's not helping anybody.
Let's look a little bit more carefully at the pandemic itself. So an interesting narrative that I saw a couple of days ago was from a Republican senator in Kentucky named Rand Paul, and he's known to be quite libertarian, and he was challenging Dr. Fauci in a testimony about the efficacy of wearing a face mask, and especially after having the virus or after receiving a vaccine. And he kept on hitting on this point in interviews afterwards, that it's everybody's personal responsibility, that you shouldn't be obliged to wear a mask. You shouldn't be obliged to do anything really, that you can just continue to live as you like. So my question is, where do you see the responsibility for over, as you said, I think it's over 550,000 deaths? Where does the responsibility lie? Does it lie with individuals? Does it lie on the government? Does it lie on state officials? Like, how did this mess just get so bad? How? It doesn't make any sense.
To answer your question, there's no one way to point the finger. I do think that elected officials have a role to play, and I do think that individual people have a role to play, because look, the government is a state is meant to protect people, right? That's the point. Why do we have a government if you're not serving the people? And I think sometimes people and elected officials both forget that they're public servants. They're not gods. They're not kings and queens. They're public servants, but we don't treat them that way. We don't. And at the end of the day, we live in a country where we say that the power of the elected comes from the consent of the governed, but we don't act that way. We don't act as though these people are accountable to us. And part of that comes from political apathy and people not voting and things like that. But when you ask whose responsibility is it, it's everybody's responsibility. If you live in a state where you had a mask mandate and you weren't wearing them and you weren't following guidelines and you were out, doing things that you had been advised against doing and you got coronavirus, well, then that is your own fault. You can't blame anyone or point the finger at anyone. But also at the same time, elected officials have a responsibility to let people know, hey, this is what you should be doing. I live in Texas. Governor Abbott made the decision that on March 10th, 13 days ago, that masks were going to no longer be mandatory in the state of Texas. That's very problematic, because the people who put their trust into the government, into elected officials, they're now going to feel as though it's okay to not wear a mask. So there's responsibility on both sides. And not to mention business owners. I saw a story yesterday on CNN about Texas business owners that have been under attack because, we believe in rights, right? And so these business owners have the right to not let you in their establishment without a mask. They have the right to do that. And you have people who are saying, but Governor Abbott said I don't have to wear a mask. Let me in. and then it turns into a fight. There was a woman not too far from where I live in Galveston, Texas. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but Galveston, Texas is an island south of Houston. And on Galveston Island, this elderly lady went to a bank to withdraw money, and she had on no mask. And a police officer respectfully asked her, "Ma'am, please put on a mask." "No, I don't have to put on a mask." Governor Abbott said, "I don't have to do it." So after asking her multiple times to put on a mask and her refusing, he had to arrest her. And when he was arresting her, she was fighting, and she was saying, "Are you serious? You can't do this to me, and I have the right to not wear a mask." And this is the thing. Yes, ma'am, you do have the right to not wear a mask, but not in a private place. This bank is not public property. It's privately owned and operated. They ask you to wear a mask, you put on a mask, or you get out. And so, also, I want to say in San Antonio, Texas, a manager of a Jack in the Box fast food restaurant was stabbed multiple times by a man that he escorted out for not wearing a mask. So it's becoming violent. And like I said, I believe that rhetoric is, I believe the violence is connected to the things that President Trump said during his tenure.
So just so I can understand this mask mandate, so if you're in a public space, you do not have to wear a mask at the moment. Is that correct?
Right. So basically what Governor Abbott has set in motion is there is no mask mandate, meaning anywhere that it's easier to say where you have to than where you don't have to, if that makes sense. So unless you enter a place that has specifically posted a mask rule, then you assume that you don't have to wear one. And so that's where we are in Texas. Unless a place of business explicitly states you have to wear a mask, then it's just basically life as usual, business as usual, no mask required.
And as you say, it's a choice. So if you were entering a building which didn't require a mask, would you continue to wear one? Do you think it's the right thing to do?
Yes, I've been wearing a mask everywhere. I would have worn a mask to talk to you, but it was digital. There was no need. But that's just how serious I am about wearing a mask. I have no shame. No one's gonna make me feel guilty for wearing a mask. If someone does try to make me feel guilty for wearing a mask, I'm simply just going to walk away, because I don't even want you getting that close to me and breathing on me. I'm just being honest. It's not safe. So yes, I have been wearing a mask. I will continue to wear a mask. I will continue to wash my hands. I will continue to follow all the guidelines that the CDC and Dr. Fauci have put out. Yes.
So as we've discussed the current administration and how you don't expect, and to be honest, neither do I, any form of revolutionary change. My question is that, and it may seem like a little bit of a cynical one, but it's, I think, quite realistic too. Joe Biden is nearly 80 years old, so it's unlikely that he's going to be running again. Realistically, it doesn't look very likely. It could happen, but it doesn't look very likely.
Who's to say?
So in the event that he didn't run and Kamala Harris were to run, do you think that we should expect anything different, or is she very similar to Joe Biden, more of this middle ground?
Well, okay, let's start with Joe Biden and his reelection. He is old, but so was Trump. Trump is only a few years younger. They're both in their 70s. His age is of concern, but I'm not sure how major of a concern, right? Circumstances change. I believe that if he were to run again and somehow Donald Trump was on the ballot as the Republican nominee, I think people with no issue would vote for an 80-year-old man. However, depending on the circumstances, if we have a different Republican candidate, I think that Joe may have some serious competition. But if Kamala was to be the front runner on the Democratic ticket, before we can even address whether or not she would be different from Joe Biden, I would rise the question: do you think it's realistic for Kamala to win an election? Not based on politics, but just based on, well, I guess politics, but identity politics.
Yeah, I think that she would face many challenges based on her gender and her ethnicity. And I think they could serve as barriers to her.
Right. But in the event that she does make history again, and she becomes the first woman to be president of the United States, I do see her having an administration that's different than Joe Biden's, just for the simple fact that she's a different person. I mean, to answer that question, double back to what you asked me about Joe Biden and did I see him as an Obama-like figure? Just because he was Obama's vice president doesn't mean that he's Obama 2.0. And I think the same can be said for Kamala. If she were to ever become president, I don't see her being Joe Biden Jr. I see her being Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris would be a different type of president than Joe Biden. Absolutely.
What does her election to the role of vice president mean for you as an African-American woman?
Her election as vice president means, to me as an African-American woman, it represents I hate to revert everything back to Obama, but his slogan of change. That's the biggest thing that it represents to me, because for so long, people who look like Kamala, whether it be women or African Americans or Asian Americans, have been in a position where ascending to that level of office in this country didn't seem realistic. It just didn't. It didn't seem possible. So for her to ascend to the second highest office of our country is a big deal. And I like to put it like this: she's the first, but she's not the last.
Within the African-American community, it seems like there is unanimous support for the Democratic Party and for Democratic candidates. That may seem to be a generalization, but the statistics seem to hold up there. I do want to know why and what are the reasons for movements like Blacks for Trump and Kanye running for president as this extreme right Christian type of candidate. What do you put that down to?
Well, for starters, it's profitable to be contrary. It's always profitable to be contrary. We've had figures like I think the two ladies, Diamond and Silk.
Yes. Yes, they're memorable.
Yes, Miss Diamond and Miss Silk, right? And we've seen people like Ben Carson and people like you said, Kanye West. First of all, like I said, first and foremost, it's always profitable to be contrary, right? Also, people like Omarosa, Candace Owens. There's a list of African American people that have aligned themselves with the Republican Party. But I'll say this: I'm not going to quote unquote judge them per se for their political sense, right? I don't want to be there, but I don't think that their support of the Republican Party is truly because they believe what the Republican Party stands for. Now, I'm not inside of their brains, so I can't say with, pure certainty. But it's interesting to me that people would align themselves with a political party that goes against their own, or what I would think would be against their own interests. The Republican Party is not very inclusive, and it's not just applicable to African American people. It's not inclusive across the board. It's not inclusive to people that are not Christian. It's not inclusive to people who are not male. It's not inclusive to people that are not, born and raised here in the USA. There's a lot to be said about the Republican Party and inclusivity. I, as a Black person, I don't see what part of their party platform would be appealing to me. But maybe these people like Kanye and Ben Carson and Candace Owens, maybe they see something in the Republican Party that I don't. Diamond and Silk, maybe the Republican Party afforded them the opportunity to afford diamonds and silk. You get where I'm going with this? Yeah, there has to be something. There's something else that's attractive about the Republican Party to these people, and I don't believe it's their political stance. I believe it's something that's small, rectangular, and green.
Well, let's circle back to the situation in Texas. A lot of people were very inspired by what has transpired in Georgia in the recent elections, and how that state, which was once very red, suddenly elected 2 Democratic senators and also voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to serve as president and vice president. Now, again, when we look at that outsider non-US perspective of Texas, Texas is traditionally seen as being this gun-slinging, Wild West, very conservative state. Not too different from the images of Georgia, actually. So, as somebody who is a proud Texan and somebody who lives in the state, I mean, are the stereotypes of Texas fair? That's the first question. And then the second is, can Texas actually become a democratic state too?
Well, the first thing that I would like to say in response to that is ye and ha. But more seriously about the stereotypes of Texas, yes, they're true. Texas, this is how I would describe Texas, right? Texas is a very large state. The largest state in the contiguous United States. Alaska, I'm not counting you because you're not a part of our, continuous land area. But as far as mainland United States, Texas is the biggest, the proudest, and the loudest. But with that size comes a lot of regional differences. So when you're talking about politics, what happens where I live, right, in Southeast Texas, an area with our biggest metropolitan city, Houston, is very blue here, right? And you can move to other parts of the state where it's very, very red, where it's more rural. You're going to find counties that are solidly red. And if you move north towards another major metropolitan area like Dallas, you start to see blue again. And then, there's that border area with places like El Paso, the Rio Grande Valley. You're probably going to see mostly red still with a little blue here and there. But the gun slinging and all of that, yeah, it's true. I mean, it's true. You come to Texas and look, you got guns, gold, and God. And our gold is not actual gold, it's oil. We call it Texas tea, right? So guns, gold, and God is what you're going to find here in Texas. There's a gun shop and a church on every corner. But so yes, the stereotypes that people have about Texas generally are true. However, the second question, right, was what happened in Georgia happened in Texas? Is that what you were asking?
Exactly. So can a state which has a gun shop and a church on every corner, can that reconcile with being a democratic state?
Yes, it can. And I think that Georgia is the perfect example. And the reason that I'm saying it can is because you have to look at not only the change demographics of the state, right? Because we know that the Latino population in Texas is exploding exponentially. And like I said before, it's not just the fact that they are Latinos, it's where they're coming from. Because in a state like Florida, where you have Latinos coming from Cuba, for example, they tend to be staunchly Republican. But if we have Latinos coming from Mexico and Central America and some from South America, I think we can pull more voters to blue. The only thing standing between Texas and the color blue, I believe, are two things: abortion and voter suppression. So if we can get people to not be single issue voters, if we can get people to move past the support of the Republican Party strictly on the basis of abortion, that coupled with less voter suppression, because that's really what changed Georgia, voter suppression in and of itself. Making people who were previously disenfranchised, giving them the tools and resources necessary to get their vote counted. That's going to be the difference maker. And in Texas, we're going to have to fight tooth and nail, because we do have people in our state government that are fighting to keep people disenfranchised, to make laws that keep people from voting. Just a quick anecdotal story here in Texas during the presidential elections. There was a big issue about how to administer votes. Mail-in ballots. A lot of people wanted to send in mail-in ballots because, hey, we're in a pandemic. Who wants to stand in line in close proximity to people for hours and risk, death? Quite honestly, it sounds, really dark and bleak, but that's the reality of it. Like, voting is important, but is it worth my life? I'd much rather mail in my ballot. Well, the state of Texas has so many provisions for what constitutes someone being eligible to mail in a ballot. And fear of catching coronavirus is nowhere within those boundaries. And so the people who did maintain the ability to have a mail-in ballot here in my county, Harris County, Texas, which is bigger than whole like county. It's bigger than states like Connecticut and Rhode Island and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, Harris County, which is the county that Houston is in, is huge. And don't quote me on this, but I think Harris County has upwards of maybe 7 million people in the county. I'm not certain, so don't quote me on that.
Huge.
But it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And guess how many mail-in ballot drop-off boxes designated for each county?
I can't even begin to imagine. Very few. One. Wow.
So if you wanted to drop off a mail-in ballot in the state in Harris County, Harris County, Texas, think of all those people that only have one designated location. And then think about accessibility. Think about the location of that one place. Instead of having multiple drop-off boxes throughout a county that's so widespread with so many people, now you're asking people that may not be able to actually get their ballot where it needs to go. Some of these people are disabled. Some of these people can't make the trip. Some of these people don't have the transportation in order. You get what I'm saying? There's so many barriers that would stop a person from being able to get that mail-in ballot from their home to that single drop-off box.
Do you think it's done on purpose?
Oh, of course it's done with full intent. It was done during this election in order to stop people from voting. And we also had we have so many different avenues of voter suppression. I live in an area of Houston that is not very heavily populated with African American people. And the reason I'm saying that is because I want you to know that since I've been 18, right, I've been voting at every possible turn.
Right.
Presidential elections, I mean, I've only been eligible for two, 2016 and 2020. But aside from that, I've voted in state, elections and local elections, primaries, everything that you can vote for, I've done that. I have never, and I have never had to wait in line to vote at my local polling location. One time. I'm always able to walk in. There's multiple machines. There's all there to immediately check me in, let me vote, in and out. Now, my University of Houston, is across the street from a university called Texas Southern University, and it's a historically Black university. And both of those schools serve as voting locations. But I want you to think about it like this. Now, as of recently, Harris County changed it to where voters have the ability to vote anywhere within the county, right? I don't know if that's something permanent or not, but there was a time where you had to vote at your designated polling location. Whenever we had our election for mayor, Black people over in 3rd Ward, which, like I said, where these universities are located, and probably one of the most heavily African American areas of the city, people were in line for hours.
Wow.
Whenever there's, what was it? I think it was the primaries in early 2020. There was a man that made the news because he didn't get out of the polling location until after midnight.
Wow. That's ridiculous.
An older African American man. He I think, if I remember correctly, he was probably in his 60s or so. So these are all tactics to discourage certain people from voting. Because if you have areas that are heavily populated with African American people and you make the line super long and you don't have enough voting machines, and you do all of these different things, it's going to discourage them. Realistically, you have to be a hell of a citizen to want to stand in line for 6, 7, 8 hours just to cast a ballot. It's absurd.
It's by design.
It's intentional. Yeah, it's by design. Exactly, it's by design. Definitely.
I have a couple of questions for you related to the racial situation in the United States at the moment. But I do want to hit a little bit further on two topics related to Texas firsthand. How awful is Ted Cruz?
Oh no, you're gonna get me in trouble. I'm supposed to be so unbiased as a journalist, right? I've even written articles about Ted Cruz. I've spoken to his people, but Ted Cruz is I don't think he's what Texas deserves. I don't think that he's what Texas deserves. His latest fiasco with going to Cancun while people were literally, not figuratively, freezing to death in his state, that was wildly inappropriate. No matter how he tries to package that, and clean it up, it's wrong on all accounts. And I think the state of Texas deserves better. Obviously, that one single issue is not why I'm saying that. But yes, to answer your question, how awful is he? Like, all I say is I believe that Texas deserves better. Mm-hmm. But we have to want better for ourselves.
And then the other question that I had for you, vis-a-vis local issues in Texas, is the construction of the border wall between Texas and other southern states with Mexico. This entire situation with regards to the wall seems to have made it more difficult for people to enter the country. Now, some will say that the wall is ineffective, that there are other ways to enter, but it does seem that it has, in some ways, either it supplements policies of the Trump administration, or it symbolizes that, you're not welcome. That was what I saw from it, was you're not welcome. That's the image that it sent. Since Biden has been elected, there now is what is being described as a crisis at the southern border, with thousands and thousands of people trying to gain entry to the United States to stake their claim for asylum. And I'm wondering, based on what has been said this week by Joe Biden, that people are not welcome to come to the United States during the pandemic, that they're not welcome. Do you not believe that perhaps the language that he's used, despite on the campaign stating that the United States would be more open, that language of "you're not welcome, don't come," is just straight out of the Trump playbook?
So this is my first. I'm going to give you my opinion on the border wall. I think the border wall is ridiculous, and I think it's a waste of money. I don't think that it is effective in doing what our government is attempting to do, which is to directly stop the number of people crossing into the United States illegally. I don't think it's stopping that. Like I said before, people were hopping over walls at the Capitol, scaling the walls, even when they didn't have to, right? There were stairs on either side. They had like this super spy moment. Why would you try to scale a wall when there's stairs to your left or to your right? It's just ridiculous. And so imagine, but I'm saying that to make a point. Imagine people jumping over walls because they think it's fun and it's cool and it's edgy. Now imagine the determination of someone that's doing it because their life actually depends on it. That wall is not stopping you, right? The wall is all stands between me and a better life for myself and my family. That wall is not stop. I can go under it, go over it, and go around it. And if I have the right tools, hell, I may even be able to get through it. It's not stopping me. It's just a wall. It's just a wall. Walls are meant to be knocked down. It is just a wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Okay. So, one, I think the wall is ridiculous, and two, to address Joe Biden's language. Yeah, I do think it's similar to Trump's, and I also want to say that the Biden administration has not rectified what went wrong at our borders under the Trump administration. Children in cages, people being treated poorly, children that are still to this day separated from their parents. There has to be some real efforts to rectify that. Like I said, I think of myself as a fair person. I can get past for me on this particular thing. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. And this is not what the United States is supposed to be about. And a caveat to this, the question shouldn't be like, how do we fix the border? How do we stop people getting into our country? The real question is, how do we stand as a world superpower and help rectify the terrible conditions in these countries that are causing people to feel like their only option is share? That's the only way you're going to solve it. Trying to stop people from getting in is useless. It's pointless and it's cruel. If you really want to make a difference, really want to stop people from trying to get your country, help fix theirs.
Do you think that the United States has been the source of many problems in these countries?
Oh, absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt. The United States, even with being a world superpower, even with doing a lot of good, we can't ignore that there's a lot of bad has been done. And it didn't start with Trump or Obama or even Bush. These are things that go back decades, right? Seeds that have been planted long before you and I even existed. And so at what point do you rectify that? What point do you step in and say, okay, we have to do something? I mean, even back into the 80s, when you think about what was going on in the United States with the crack epidemic and drugs being brought in, you know, decades later, for it to just be found out that the American government was sponsoring guerrilla groups in Nicaragua. And you get what I'm saying? It's you have to accept responsibility at some point for your role in the destruction of these countries.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't anticipate, but it's always one that I like to hear an answer to, especially from somebody from the US.
Okay.
Do you think that the United States is the best country in the world? And do you think that it can learn anything from other countries? Or is it always that America is the best, it's the superpower, and it knows the right thing to do?
I wasn't expecting that question.
Neither was I, but it just came up.
That's a tough question. And the reason I say it's is because as an American, most of us believe, really want to believe that we live in the greatest country. It's such a subjective question because where it can be the greatest on earth depending on your personal beliefs, right? I will say this though. The United States is not above learning from other countries when it comes to things like how we treat each other, our social policies, educational policies, healthcare. There's so much for us to learn. The quality of life in the United States, I'll say this, the quality of life in the United States is not the best. The quality of life. Now, whether or not it's the best country, right? Because how do you constitute what makes a country great? The amount of wealth the country holds, its military power, like what makes the country the greatest, so to speak. So I can't really say whether or not we're the greatest, but the quality of life here is not the greatest. No. And we can learn from a lot of places. Just to be specific, some, European countries, some European countries we can take a few notes from.
So now that you've mentioned social policies, I think it's important to talk finally about a very big issue in society in the United States, and that is race. The country was founded upon in slavery, and it was also founded upon expropriation of land from indigenous Americans. So my question is, can slavery ever really end in the United States, or is it part of the fabric of the country?
It's part of the fabric. It's so intertwined. Racism, not even just slavery, racism itself is
Mm.
some people are probably going to be angry at this, but racism is as American as apple pie, right?
Whoa.
I mean,
true.
we always say insert random thing is as American as apple pie. Yeah.
Mm.
There's things that are staunchly American, apple pie, baseball, and racism. I mean, I shouldn't be laughing at that, right? As a person who has been on the receiving end of it, but I mean, I can't do anything but laugh because it's true. It's so intertwined in the fabric of who we are. This is what people have to understand. The first African people to step foot on this land as slaves came here in 1619. The United States wasn't even a thought until 1776. So, almost 2 centuries of slavery happened on this land prior to the United States being a country. So, how could it not be the fabric of our country? There's a commercial. I don't know if it still runs. The touch, the feel, the fabric of our lives, the touch, the feel of cotton, the fabric of our lives. Now, each child listening to that little jingle, I was disturbed because cotton is the fabric of our lives. Cotton is a big part of what made the United States what it is. And that happened through slavery. It really is the fabric of our lives. And that one little ball of white fluff has caused so much trouble throughout human history. And I don't think the United States, and like I said, I hate to be a pessimist, but I see myself as a realist. I don't think that you can separate slavery or racism or any of that from the fabric of America, because that's what we're made of. You are what you are, right? And until, like, we can't even have an honest conversation. The fact that you are not American is probably the only reason that you haven't interjected and interrupted me and countered everything that I've said thus far related to racism and slavery. Because, and that's just the honest truth. If I was talking to you when you were in the United States, the conversation would probably be going very differently right now. So we can't even get to a space where we have an honest dialogue about it. So how can it not be a part of who we are? It is. And the sad part is it doesn't have to have such a hold, right? It doesn't have to be so negative, because even as individuals, we all have things that happened in our past that we may not be so proud of, but you have to acknowledge it and correct it in order to move forward. The United States has yet to acknowledge and correct what they've done to Native American people, African American people, etc.
It seems to me that the push against racism in the United States is largely coming from the people through social movements. It's not coming from the levers of government, irrespective of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House or in Congress. It seems like the push against racism and the recognizing of racism as systemic in America, that is coming from the people. And that is coming from largely the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. So one of my final questions to you is this: do you believe that a social movement like that has the ability to change anything in a country that is that big, in a country with that much bureaucracy, and as you have said, in a country with that much racism, can a social movement actually make the change?
So now I'm going to be on the other side, and I'm going to jump to optimism. So,
good.
Yeah, I can't be a pessimist all of my life. I do think that social movements have the ability to be a catalyst for change because they have in the past. You had people who were abolitionists fighting for the end of slavery. You had people who were civil rights leaders that were fighting to end segregation and Jim Crow and other forms of discrimination. You had social movements that were meant to give women equal power, voting rights, all of these different things. We've seen social movements make significant change in the past. So I don't see why it would be any different now. The people always have to stand up and demand change for any change to happen. It never happens from the top down. It's something that occurs from the bottom up. So that means if we have people who continue to put their feet to the street, if we have people that continue to mobilize politically, making sure that people who are historically disenfranchised are able to make their voices heard, if we let our elected officials know what we expect of them, and if we don't get what is expected, they will be forced to get out, then yes, change can come. But it has to be a collective effort, and people can't give up halfway through the fight. You know, it has to be. You can't say Black Lives Matter in June 2020, and then in March 2021, you just don't care. It doesn't matter. You stopped fighting. You stopped correcting racism when you see it. You know, it has to be a continuous fight for freedom, because think about it like this. Slavery was initially, it ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, right? And I believe that was signed in 1863. All Black people in this country were not free until June 1865. And a lot of people are unaware of this, but we have a holiday here in Texas called Juneteenth where we celebrate that day. And as a Black person, I don't see the 4th of July as Independence Day, because on July 4th, 1776, I still would have been in shackles. I wasn't free until June 1865. And remember that Galveston Island that I mentioned to you?
Yes.
That's where the last African Americans were freed. So there were Union ships that pulled up to Galveston Island. And these Union soldiers got off, and they told the African American people in Galveston, hey, I hear owners have told you this, but you're actually free. The owners withheld, did not inform these people that they were free because they wanted to get one last harvest out of them without having to pay for it. So yeah, there's a possibility for change. You just have to fight for it. So the point I was making with Juneteenth is that was in 1865. We're in 2021, and we're still fighting a very similar fight. At every corner that African American people have turned in this country, we've been met with aggression, we've been met with violence, we've been met with hatred. Every time we make a step forward, it seems as though we take 2 steps back. Prior to even Jim Crow and segregation, there were things called Black codes, and it's a lot in our history that people don't know because our education system doesn't teach it, and most people don't seek the knowledge on their own, so they don't know. They truly don't know the hell that African American people have endured, and that every situation that they may look at Black people in every negative thing that they may place upon us, like poverty or lack of education or high incarceration rates. All of those things are a direct result of racism and things that have been done to us. Our 13th Amendment that supposedly ends slavery, it doesn't actually end slavery. It just says that you can't enslave a person unless they've been convicted of a crime, right? And so immediately after that 13th Amendment was signed, when I told you about the Black codes that were here in the South, a lot of people that were not being supervised by union authorities created these laws called Black codes that allowed them to arrest Black people, specifically Black men, for anything. So if you think, just a quick example, if you have a group of people that have been enslaved their entire lives, and then you tell them that they're free, and you tell them, okay, now you need to make something of yourselves, right? But you don't allow them into your educational institutions, right? You don't allow them to walk into any banks and get business loans or funding. You don't give them jobs, etc., right? You basically condition them to just remain in the same state they were prior to slavery. So many Black people took on the profession of sharecropping, which was essentially still slavery. And you tell these people, you create laws that say like, oh, if you don't have a job, I can arrest you. So you get where I'm going with this? You make it impossible. Imagine a man in the 1860s and you've just been freed and you're looking for employment. You can't find any because, quite frankly, no one wants to hire a Black person. And then you find out that the local government has made a law that if a police officer stops you and they ask for like papers showing employment and you have none, now you are an inmate, right? You're the property of the state.
It's a continuation of slavery.
Right. And once you have been convicted of that crime, the crime being Black and not having a job, now with you being the property of the state, they rent you out to plantation owners to do the labor. It's essentially still slavery. And that went on for a very long time. And that was the reality of Black people in this country. Whenever the United States was expanding westward and giving land subsidies to families, on paper, Black people could receive those things. But in practice, it wasn't happening. The government has participated in and subsidized racial equity for generations. And the effects of that are still being seen today. There's a reason that the wealth gap between white families and Black families are so huge. And this one last thing I want to tell you that's probably going to shock you. You may or may not know this, but in the United States, the average white high school dropout has more wealth than a Black college graduate.
That's messed up.
It's so sad.
That's messed up.
That goes to show just how bad the racial inequity in terms of economics and wealth is. That even as a Black person, when you follow, quote unquote, the rules and the standards of how to progress in this society, you still can't catch up because of generations of disparity. And that's where we are. Black parents have a saying that they've passed down from generation to generation, and I'm no stranger to this. I've been told this all my life from a child. You have to work twice as hard to have half as much. Twice as hard. So I already knew from a young age that if I wanted to succeed in this country, that I was going to have to put in twice the work, only to reap half of the benefits. I live in a country where a white man that didn't even graduate from high school is probably wealthier and will be wealthier than me throughout the duration of our lives. That should speak volumes.
It's shocking.
It is
Truly shocking.
But I also want to note that, most American families, their wealth is tied into property ownership. And so, like I said before, when the United States was expanding westward and they were giving land grants and, subsidizing these white families in exchange for them settling the land out west, Black people weren't given that opportunity. So we weren't able to pass down property and land from generation to generation. And when we were eligible to purchase land, I'm sure you've probably heard of the practice of redlining.
Yes.
And so when you have things like that have occurred, like I said, it's systemic and it's generational. And until you address these things, we can't move forward, because my philosophy is no one's free until we're all free. Native American people, Black people, Latino people, Asian people, women of all colors, white women included. No one in this country, LGBTQ people, no one is going to be free until we're all free. So we have a long fight ahead, but do I think it's impossible? No. Do I think that it'll be perfect in our lifetimes? No. But that doesn't mean that we don't fight for the generations that are going to come after us.
Well, I have 5 minutes left of your time, so I'll ask one final question to you.
Okay.
Given that you have teed this up so well in terms of describing this inequality, economic inequality, social inequality, and these little stories that you tell about what it's like growing up and what your parents would tell you, and hitting home on these really personal things. My question, it's a final one, but I think that it hits home really well and ends this interview quite well. Were you actually surprised when you saw Derek Chauvin having his leg on George Floyd's neck and strangling him to death on the ground? Did that surprise you? Or do you think that this is the reality that African Americans have known for a very long time, and that it's only being known by predominantly white people now and the rest of the world?
No, it didn't shock me at all. I mean, it was disturbing, obviously. I mean, anytime you see something like that, I would think a natural human reaction is, disgust and being disturbed. But was I shocked? No. Like you said, that's the reality of Black people in this country, and it has been ever since we got here. It's just now a lot of white people are seeing what we go through. It's easy, especially also when the United States is still technically very segregated, meaning that people live and work around people who look like them. Even though segregation is not legal, it's still a big part of how we are divided up. I mean, just pull out a map that'll show you where people live, where white people are concentrated, where Black people are concentrated. So when you have that separation, it's easy as a white person to truly not know anything about what Black people endure. But no, I wasn't shocked. And I don't know.
Continue.
No, yeah, I was gonna say I don't know any other Black person that was shocked.
So in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of an economic crisis, in the midst of a pandemic of racism, in fact, in the midst of all of these different things, where do you have, pose for hope? Do you still have hope for a brighter future?
I do. I hope, because like I said before, change has happened. It's been slow, but it's happened. The progress that we've made, even though people have fought tooth and nail against it, it's happened. A lot of people had to die for it to happen. And I don't think that this is any different than in the past. I think people are going to have to die. People are going to have their blood spilled on the streets. But that's the nature of this type of situation. But I do have hope for change. And I'm never going to throw my hands up and say, oh, things are never going to get better. We just have to accept being treated as less than. No, I'm never going to accept that. I'm always going to be hopeful that the future is going to be brighter.
Carla, thank you for coming on The New View. It has been a pleasure to have you on. And yeah, thank you for kicking off the 3rd season of this show with me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I had so much fun.
Thank you for being here. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.